The conference room on Meridian Prime Station buzzed with quiet conversations as 17 different species gathered around the massive circular table. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the varied atmospheric requirements of the Galactic Council members. Ambassador Zara Thek of the Valori Federation adjusted her breathing apparatus and looked around the room with barely concealed disgust. The humans were coming today, and she already knew this would be a waste of time. Admiral Kethnar of the Crystalline Hegemony was reviewing his datapad for the third time this morning. His crystal-like features reflected the light as he shook his massive head. The files contained decades of human military observations, and every single report painted the same picture. Humans were chaotic, undisciplined, and emotionally driven warriors who knew nothing about proper military organization. The species had spent their entire recorded history fighting each other in the most primitive and wasteful ways imaginable. War Marshal Veltosh of the Thylorian Empire drummed his 6 fingers on the table impatiently. His people had been observing human conflicts for 40 years, and the reports were always the same. Humans threw soldiers at problems without proper planning or coordination. They fought with emotion instead of logic, and their command structures were so loose that individual soldiers often acted independently during combat. It was exactly the opposite of everything the galaxy had learned about effective warfare over the past 10,000 years. The Altarian representative, General Morthak, was studying holographic displays of recent human conflicts. The images showed soldiers in strange camouflage patterns, moving through jungles and desert environments without the precise formations that proper military doctrine demanded. Instead of maintaining clean lines and organized advancement, these humans scattered across the battlefield like insects. They used cover and concealment in ways that seemed random, and their weapons were primitive projectile throwers instead of proper energy systems. Commander Zephius of the Quarian Collective was perhaps the most frustrated of all. His people were master strategists who had perfected the art of warfare through mathematical precision and predictable outcomes. They had studied human conflicts in places called Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam, and concluded that humans were incapable of learning from their mistakes. Every engagement followed the same pattern: emotional responses, poor coordination, and eventual withdrawal when casualties became too high. The arrival chime sounded, and the massive doors to the conference room opened with a soft hiss. Colonel Jake Morrison walked in first, followed by diplomatic attaché Lisa Carter and 3 other humans. The aliens watched with interest as the human delegation took their seats. Morrison was a tall man with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Carter was younger, with sharp features, and carried herself with quiet confidence. Ambassador Zara Thek activated the translation matrix and spoke first. "Welcome to Meridian Prime, Colonel Morrison. We appreciate Earth's willingness to contribute to the galactic defense effort against the Devourer threat. However, we must be frank about our expectations. Your species has a history of chaotic military organization, and we have serious concerns about your ability to operate alongside civilized forces." Morrison listened without expression as the translation came through his earpiece. He had expected this attitude. The galaxy had been watching human conflicts for decades, but they had only seen the surface. They had no understanding of the complexity beneath what appeared to be chaos. "Thank you, Ambassador Zara Thek. We understand your concerns, and we're here to discuss how Earth can best contribute to the common defense." Admiral Kethnar leaned forward. "The Devourer threat is unlike anything the galaxy has faced before. These machine intelligences have overwhelmed 3 star systems in the past year, using tactics that exploit traditional military doctrine. We need forces that can follow orders, maintain formation, and execute predetermined battle plans. Your species has shown little aptitude for any of these requirements." War Marshal Veltosh brought up a holographic display showing recent Devourer attacks. The mechanical constructs moved in perfect coordination, destroying everything in their path. "Our analysis shows they target command structures first, then exploit the resulting chaos to eliminate resistance. We need disciplined troops who can maintain cohesion, even when leadership is compromised. Human forces have shown a disturbing tendency toward independent action that could prove catastrophic." Lisa Carter spoke for the first time. We appreciate your analysis of our military history. However, we believe there may be some misunderstandings about human military doctrine and capabilities. Perhaps we could arrange for some of your observers to visit our training facilities and see our forces in action. General Morthak made a sound that might have been laughter through his translator. We have observed your training facilities. Your soldiers crawl through mud, carry heavy packs for no apparent reason, and spend enormous amounts of time on what you call physical fitness. Real warfare is conducted through proper use of technology and energy shields, not primitive endurance exercises. Commander Zephyus pulled up tactical analyses from recent galactic conflicts. When the Nexus Guard defended Kepler 442c, they maintained perfect formation until the end. Their energy barriers held for 4 days, and their withdrawal was executed with mathematical precision. When the Altarian Defense Corps engaged Devourer forces at Rigel 7, they followed established doctrine exactly. Their defeat was honorable and predictable. Human forces would likely scatter at the first sign of serious resistance. Morrison finally spoke. We understand your concerns about human military effectiveness. However, we believe our forces could be useful in specific roles. Our soldiers are accustomed to operating in challenging environments and adapting to unexpected situations. We don't require the same level of technological support as some other species. Ambassador Zarathek exchanged glances with the other council members. This was exactly what they had. Expected humans always tried to make their weaknesses sound like strengths. Their inability to maintain proper formations became adaptability. Their lack of advanced technology became self-reliance. Their chaotic command structure became flexibility. It was almost amusing. War Marshal Veltosh made his decision. Very well, Colonel Morrison. We are prepared to offer Earth a role in the galactic defense. There is a frontier world designated Kepler 442b that requires garrison forces. The world has minimal strategic value, but it could serve as a training ground for human forces while providing some small contribution to the overall defense network. The other council members nodded in agreement. Kepler 442b was perfect for the humans. It was remote, dangerous, and ultimately expendable. If human forces could hold it for a few weeks, it might prove they had some military value. If they were overrun quickly, it would confirm what everyone already knew about their capabilities. Either way, the galaxy would learn something useful about these strange emotional warriors. Morrison looked at Carter, who gave a small nod. We accept the assignment to Kepler 442b. When do you need our forces in position? Admiral Kethnar checked his chronometer. Devourer scouts have been detected in that sector. The main assault force could arrive within 2 standard months. We recommend deploying your forces as soon as possible to establish whatever defensive positions you consider appropriate. The meeting concluded with formal exchanges of data and communication protocols. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Ambassador Zarathek felt a mixture of pity and curiosity. These humans seemed earnest enough, but they had no idea what they were walking into. The Devourers had crushed every force sent against them using the same brutal efficiency. They would make short work of whatever chaotic defense the humans managed to organize. Commander Zephyus was already making arrangements to send observers to document the human defense of Kepler 442b. It would be valuable data for future military planning and might provide insights into how quickly untrained forces could be eliminated. The humans would serve their purpose as expendable troops, and the galaxy would move on to more serious military solutions. As Colonel Morrison and his team left Meridian Prime Station, none of the alien representatives suspected they had just made the most significant military miscalculation in galactic history. The humans were indeed different from every other species the galaxy had encountered, but not in the ways anyone expected. The coming battle at Kepler 442b would teach the galaxy what a professional human army really meant. General Patricia Stone stood before the massive holographic display in Earth's Global Defense Command Center. The blue light from the tactical map cast sharp shadows across her weathered face. As she studied the data from Meridian Prime, Kepler 442b appeared as a small red dot in the outer rim territories surrounded by the known positions of Devourer scout forces. The assignment was exactly what she had expected from the Galactic Council. Admiral Chen Wei moved to stand beside her, examining the stellar cartography with the eye of someone who had spent decades planning military operations. The world was 3 months travel time from Earth using conventional faster-than-light drives. It had minimal infrastructure, a harsh climate, and was positioned directly in the path of the advancing Devourer fleet. It was a textbook suicide mission, disguised as a defensive assignment. Colonel Morrison had returned from Meridian Prime 6 hours ago, and his briefing had confirmed what everyone in the room already suspected. The galactic powers viewed human military forces as expendable cannon fodder. Their analysis of human military history was superficial, and their understanding of human military doctrine was practically non-existent. They had observed the chaos of human conflicts without comprehending the method behind the apparent madness. General Stone activated the communication array and contacted the various military commands across Earth. Within minutes, senior officers from every major military organization were connected to the secure conference. The faces on the secondary displays represented centuries of combined military experience and expertise that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive barbarism. General Martinez from the Americas spoke first. The tactical data shows Kepler 442b is a mountainous world with limited water sources. The terrain is similar to Afghanistan, but with more extreme weather patterns. We're looking at a defender's paradise if we approach it correctly. The natural choke points and elevation changes will force any attacking force into predictable movement corridors. General Kumar from the Asian Defense Alliance pulled up geological surveys. The mineral composition suggests extensive cave systems and underground water sources. The planet has been surveyed but never properly mapped. We could establish hidden supply depots and fallback positions that orbital reconnaissance would never detect. The indigenous plant life provides natural camouflage for defensive installations. Admiral Chen Wei began outlining the deployment timeline. We'll need advanced teams on site within 30 days to begin reconnaissance and site preparation. The main force should deploy in phases, with engineering units establishing the infrastructure necessary for extended operations. The galaxy expects us to fight their kind of war with traditional formations and energy barriers. We're going to give them something completely different, Captain. Ryan Davis received his orders 12 hours later. He would lead the advanced reconnaissance team to Kepler 442b with a mandate to assess the tactical situation and begin preliminary defensive preparations. His team included some of the most experienced soldiers in human military service. Master Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had served in 7 different combat zones and could organize defensive positions in any terrain. Lieutenant Kyle Thompson was a combat engineer who specialized in improvised fortifications and obstacle construction. His expertise would be crucial for turning Kepler 442b's natural terrain into an integrated defensive network. Intelligence specialist Susan Wright had spent 15 years analyzing enemy tactics and would be responsible for understanding how the Devourers operated at the tactical level. The advance team departed Earth aboard a modified transport vessel designed for long-range reconnaissance missions. The ship was equipped with advanced sensor arrays, manufacturing equipment, and enough supplies to support independent operations for 6 months. The journey to Kepler 442b would take 8 weeks, giving the team time to study every piece of available intelligence about their destination and their enemy. During the transit, Captain Davis reviewed the Devourer tactical analyses provided by the Galactic Council. The machine intelligences appeared to rely on overwhelming technological superiority and predictable assault patterns. They had defeated every galactic military force through superior firepower and precise coordination. Their tactics were mathematically perfect and devastatingly effective against conventional defensive strategies. Master Sergeant Rodriguez studied the terrain maps and orbital surveys of Kepler 442b. The world reminded her of deployments in mountainous regions where conventional military wisdom had proven inadequate. The key to success would be using the environment as a force multiplier rather than fighting against it. Small unit tactics and distributed defenses would be far more effective than traditional strongpoints. Lieutenant Thompson focused on the engineering challenges of establishing defensive positions without advanced galactic construction equipment. Human military engineers had always excelled at creating effective fortifications using available materials, and improvised techniques. The planet's geology would allow for camouflage positions that could withstand significant bombardment while remaining nearly invisible to orbital sensors. Intelligence specialist Wright analyzed the patterns in Devourer attacks against previous targets. The machines demonstrated remarkable efficiency, but also troubling inflexibility. They appeared to expect resistance, to follow predictable models, and became less effective when confronted with unexpected tactical approaches. Human military doctrine emphasized adaptation and improvisation, exactly the qualities that might prove decisive against such rigid opponents. Meanwhile, on Meridian Prime, the Galactic observers were making their own preparations. Commander Zephyus had selected a team of military analysts to document the human defense of Kepler 442b. Strategic analyst Morgeth from the Silicon Confederacy would focus on tactical decision-making, while observer Velnath from the Crystal Hegemony would record the timeline of the inevitable human defeat. The Galactic observers expected to witness a textbook example of how untrained forces performed against superior opponents. The humans would likely attempt to establish traditional defensive positions, which the Devourers would systematically destroy. The data would be valuable for training future garrison forces in what not to do when facing technological superiority. Ambassador Zarathek reviewed the tactical projections one final time before approving the observer mission. The mathematical models showed human forces on Kepler 442b lasting between 6 and 18 hours once the main Devourer assault began. The variables included terrain advantages and the possibility that humans might retreat into defensive positions rather than maintaining proper military formations. The observer team departed for Kepler 442b 3 days behind the human advance force. They carried the most sophisticated recording equipment available and had orders to document every aspect of the coming battle. Their ship was equipped with stealth technology that would allow them to observe from orbit without interfering. In the engagement, Captain Davis and his team arrived at Kepler 442b ahead of schedule and immediately began their assessment. The planet was even more suitable for defensive operations than the surveys had indicated. The mountain ranges created natural barriers, and the atmospheric conditions would interfere with many types of orbital bombardment. The advance team established a concealed base camp and began detailed reconnaissance. Over the following weeks, more human forces arrived in carefully planned increments. Engineering units began construction projects that appeared random to orbital observation, but followed a comprehensive defensive plan. Combat units conducted training exercises that looked like routine military drills but were actually rehearsals for specific tactical scenarios. The Galactic observers watched these preparations with growing confusion. The humans were not building the energy barriers and fortified positions that proper military doctrine required. Instead, they seemed to be dispersing their forces across the planet in small groups with no apparent coordination. The construction projects looked more like infrastructure development than military preparation. Commander Zephyus transmitted his initial observations to Meridian Prime. The human forces are conducting activities that do not conform to recognized military standards. They appear to be establishing numerous small camps rather than centralized defensive positions. Their construction efforts focus on transportation and communication infrastructure rather than weapons emplacements. Strategic analyst Morgeth was particularly puzzled by the human emphasis on what appeared to be routine maintenance activities. Human engineers spent enormous amounts of time on supply lines, communication networks, and backup systems that seemed entirely unnecessary for a short-term defensive operation. It was as if they were planning for an extended campaign rather than the brief resistance that military reality would allow. Observer Velnath noted the strange human training routines that continued even after deployment. The soldiers practiced moving through terrain without proper formation discipline. They spent hours on individual marksmanship rather than coordinated fire exercises. They conducted what appeared to be escape and evasion drills, as if they expected their command structure to be compromised. Ambassador Zarathek reviewed these reports with growing frustration. The humans were behaving exactly as predicted: chaotic, undisciplined, and completely unprepared for serious warfare. Their apparent lack of understanding about PI. Captain Lisa Park stood on a ridge overlooking the main valley. where human forces had established what appeared to be their primary base. The galactic observers watching from orbit would see a collection of temporary structures and vehicle parks that looked like a standard military encampment. What they could not detect were the hundreds of concealed positions, tunnels and supply caches that had been carefully integrated into the natural terrain over the past 6 weeks. Major Scott Adams walked the perimeter of the visible camp, checking systems that the alien observers would never suspect existed. Every structure had been designed to serve multiple purposes. The communications center doubled as a decoy command post, while the real command functions were distributed across 12 different locations. The motor pool contained vehicles that could be quickly dispersed to hidden positions throughout the mountain range. Commander Zephyus had been watching the human preparations for 5 weeks and remained baffled by their approach to military organization. The humans seemed to spend more time on logistics than on tactical positioning. They had established supply lines that crisscrossed the planet in patterns that made no strategic sense. Their communication networks included redundancies that appeared completely unnecessary for a defensive operation. Strategic analyst Morgeth was particularly confused by the human emphasis on individual soldier training long. After deployment, the humans continued conducting exercises that focused on small unit operations rather than large formation maneuvers. They practiced moving through terrain without maintaining proper military formations and spent hours on marksmanship, training that emphasized adaptability over standardized procedures. Colonel Janet Murphy oversaw the supply operations that the galactic observers found so puzzling. Human logistics doctrine emphasized flexibility and redundancy in ways that seemed wasteful to species accustomed to efficient centralized systems. Every forward position maintained supplies for extended independent operations. Every unit carried emergency equipment that allowed them to continue fighting, even when cut off from. Support Captain Tim Brooks supervised the communication networks that stretched across Kepler 442b in a web of primary backup and emergency systems. The galactic military tradition relied on centralized command and control structures that allowed for precise coordination. Human doctrine assumed that command structures would be targeted and destroyed, requiring every level of the organization to operate independently when necessary. Sergeant First Class Amy Chen conducted training exercises with her squad leaders that would have horrified galactic military observers. The humans practiced scenarios where senior leadership was eliminated and junior personnel had to make critical tactical decisions. They rehearsed fighting as isolated units without support or clear orders. The emphasis on individual initiative was exactly the opposite of proper military discipline. Staff Sergeant Carlos Rivera worked with his soldiers on what they called unconventional warfare techniques. These included operating from concealed positions using terrain for protection and engaging enemies from unexpected directions. The tactics emphasized survival and effectiveness over the honor and glory that galactic military traditions considered essential to proper warrior conduct. Observer Velnath transmitted his daily report to Meridian Prime. The human forces continue to demonstrate concerning disregard for established military doctrine. Their defensive positions lack proper energy barriers and rely on primitive earthwork fortifications. Their soldiers train for scenarios that assume command failure rather than maintaining confidence in military hierarchy. Lieutenant Colonel Brad Phillips coordinated the construction of what appeared to be the main command bunker. The facility was designed to look important to orbital reconnaissance while actually serving as an elaborate decoy. The real command functions were distributed among mobile units that could relocate quickly when the battle began. The humans had learned through bitter experience that obvious targets attracted the most dangerous attention. The galactic observers noted with growing concern that human defensive preparations seemed focused on prolonged resistance rather than decisive battle. Proper military doctrine called for concentrated forces meeting enemies in direct engagement. Human doctrine appeared to assume that direct engagement was something to be avoided whenever possible, while inflicting maximum casualties through indirect means. Captain Rachel Green established forward observation posts in positions that seemed to violate every principle of defensive warfare. The humans placed small teams in isolated locations where they could be easily cut off and destroyed. Galactic military wisdom emphasized maintaining communications and mutual support. Between all defensive positions, Major Kevin Taylor supervised the establishment of what the humans called kill zones, areas where multiple weapon systems could engage attacking forces from concealed positions. These overlapping fields of fire were designed to channel enemy movements into predicted corridors where human forces could inflict maximum damage while remaining hidden from retaliation. Commander Cepheus struggled to understand the human approach to defensive warfare. Every established principle of galactic military science suggested that their dispersed positions and emphasis on concealment would result in rapid defeat when faced with concentrated enemy forces. The humans seemed to be preparing for guerrilla warfare rather than proper military engagement. Strategic analyst Morgeth reviewed the tactical data, one more time searching for some sign that the humans understood what they were facing. The Devourers had overwhelmed every defensive position in galactic history, using superior technology and coordinated assault tactics. Human preparation suggested they intended to fight a completely different kind of war, Lieutenant. Sarah Mitchell worked with civilian contractors to establish what appeared to be infrastructure projects, but were actually military positions disguised as routine construction. The humans had learned to integrate military and civilian capabilities in ways that confused enemies who expected clear distinctions between combatants and support personnel. Master Sergeant Robert Clark trained his soldiers in escape and evasion techniques that assumed their positions would be overrun and they would need to continue fighting from behind enemy lines. This pessimistic approach to military planning was completely alien to galactic military doctrine, which emphasized holding positions at all costs. Observer Velnath reported increasing concern about human military preparations. The soldiers appear to be preparing for extended unconventional warfare rather than proper defensive operations. Their emphasis on individual initiative and decentralized command structure suggests they do not understand the nature of modern military engagement against technologically superior forces. Captain Jennifer Lee established medical stations that were designed to operate independently, even when the main defensive positions were compromised. Human military doctrine assumed that casualties would be heavy and that medical personnel would need to continue operations under combat conditions. This planning for failure was completely contrary to proper military confidence. Colonel Daniel Foster reviewed the final defensive preparations as reports came in of Devourer scouts approaching the outer system. The human positions looked chaotic and uncoordinated to orbital observation, but represented the culmination of military doctrine developed through centuries of conflict against superior enemies. The galaxy had never seen anything like what was about to unfold. Commander Cepheus transmitted his final pre-battle assessment to Meridian Prime. Human forces have completed their defensive preparations, using methods that do not conform to any recognized military standard. Their dispersed positions and emphasis on concealment suggest they do not understand the nature of conventional warfare. The coming engagement should provide definitive data on the effectiveness of undisciplined human military doctrine. Strategic analyst Morgeth made his predictions based on mathematical models derived from previous Devourer engagements. Human resistance should last between 8 and 24 hours, depending on terrain advantages and the degree to which they abandon proper military formations in favor of guerrilla tactics. The data collected will be valuable for training future garrison forces. Observer Velnath positioned his recording equipment to capture every aspect of the coming battle. The galactic military establishment would want detailed documentation of how human military incompetence compared to proper defensive doctrine. The engagement would serve as a perfect example of why galactic military standards had evolved over millennia. Of warfare, Captain Davis received the final intelligence reports showing Devourer main battle fleet approaching Kepler 442b on schedule. The machines would arrive in overwhelming force, expecting to encounter the same type of resistance they had crushed throughout the galaxy. Instead, they were about to face something that no military force in galactic history had ever experienced: human soldiers fighting the kind of war humans had spent their entire existence learning to fight. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge every assumption the galaxy had made about military science. The humans had prepared in ways that seemed chaotic and undisciplined to alien observers. but represented the most sophisticated defensive doctrine in human history. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly where human intelligence had predicted they would appear. The massive mechanical constructs moved in perfect formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that had devastated every military force in galactic history. Commander Zephyus watched from his concealed observation post as the alien machines began their standard reconnaissance pattern, scanning the planet below for defensive installations. Strategic Analyst Morgeth activated his recording equipment as the first wave of Devourer probe units descended toward Kepler 442 BEO. The machines moved with mechanical precision, targeting what appeared to be the primary human defensive positions. These initial attacks had always succeeded, in previous engagements quickly eliminating resistance and allowing the main assault force to complete systematic planetary destruction. Lieutenant Colonel Brad Phillips watched the approaching enemy through concealed sensors while maintaining complete communication silence. The Devourers were following their predictable pattern, scanning for energy signatures and targeting anything that looked like a proper military installation. The human decoy positions were working perfectly, drawing enemy attention away from the real defensive network. The first Devourer probe units reached the outer perimeter of what the machines had identified as human defensive positions. The mechanical scouts advanced through seemingly empty terrain, their sensors detecting no organized resistance. Their programming told them this was normal behavior from inferior military forces who would retreat to secondary positions when faced with superior technology. Captain Rachel Green lay motionless in her concealed observation post, watching the enemy machines pass within 50 meters of her position. The Devourers moved with complete confidence, following predetermined paths toward what they believed were human strongpoints. They had no concept of the kill zones they were entering or the patient soldiers who waited in positions their sensors could not detect. Master Sergeant Maria Rodriguez waited until the enemy probe was completely within the engagement area before giving the signal, human. Weapons opened fire from dozens of concealed positions that the Devourers had never detected. The mechanical units found themselves caught in overlapping fields of fire from enemies they could not locate. Observer Velnath recorded the engagement. With growing confusion, the human soldiers were not fighting from fixed positions as proper military doctrine required. Instead, they fired from concealed locations, then immediately relocated to secondary positions before the enemy could respond. This guerrilla warfare approach was completely alien to established galactic military science. The Devourer machines responded to the unexpected resistance by implementing their standard counterattack protocols. They targeted the sources of enemy fire with overwhelming firepower designed to eliminate defensive positions. The mechanical constructs had used this approach successfully against every galactic military force, but something was wrong with the human response. Major Kevin Taylor coordinated the defense from a mobile command post that kept changing location every few minutes. The Devourers were targeting command structures exactly as expected, but human command doctrine distributed leadership responsibilities throughout the organization. When one command post was destroyed, another immediately took over without missing a beat. Commander Zephyus watched in amazement as the human defensive network continued functioning despite taking heavy casualties. The machines had eliminated what appeared to be the main command center, but human resistance actually increased rather than collapsing. This was completely contrary to every military engagement in recorded galactic history. Sergeant First Class Amy Chen assumed command of her sector when her platoon leader was killed in a Devourer bombardment. The transition was seamless, because human military doctrine trained every soldier to understand the larger tactical picture and make independent decisions when necessary. The machines had no programming to deal with enemies who became more dangerous when their leadership was eliminated. The Devourer main assault force committed to the attack, expecting to complete their mission within hours, as they had in every previous engagement. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to established military patterns. Human positions that appeared destroyed would come back to life with new defenders. Human soldiers who were cut off continued fighting, independently. Strategic Analyst Morgeth struggled to understand what he was observing. The mathematical models that predicted human defeat within hours were proving completely wrong. Human resistance was not only continuing, but actually intensifying. As the battle progressed, the soldiers were using tactics that had no equivalent in galactic military doctrine. Captain Tim Brooks coordinated communication between isolated human units using backup systems the Devourers did not know existed. When primary communication networks were destroyed, secondary systems activated automatically. When those were eliminated, emergency protocols ensured that isolated units could still coordinate their actions through predetermined signals and rally point staff. Sergeant Carlos Rivera led his remaining soldiers in a fighting withdrawal through terrain they had prepared months in advance. Every fallback position had been carefully planned and supplied with ammunition and medical supplies. The humans were not retreating in panic, but executing a deliberate strategy that drew the enemy deeper into prepared kill zones. Observer Velnath transmitted increasingly urgent reports to Meridian Prime. Human resistance continues beyond all mathematical projections. Their soldiers demonstrate individual initiative that allows continued combat effectiveness even when isolated from command structures. The defensive pattern appears to be designed to absorb punishment while inflicting maximum casualties on attacking forces. The Devourer fleet commander analyzed the tactical situation and concluded that human resistance was unexpectedly effective. The machines had expected to complete planetary subjugation within one standard day, but were now facing their second day of combat with human casualty rates far below projections and mechanical losses, significantly higher than acceptable parameters. Captain Jennifer Lee operated a field medical station that continued functioning despite being overrun twice by enemy forces. Human medical doctrine emphasized mobile treatment capabilities that could continue operating under combat conditions. The wounded soldiers who received treatment immediately returned to combat rather than evacuating as proper military procedure required. Colonel Daniel Foster coordinated the overall defensive strategy from a command post that existed only as a communication node between distributed leadership elements. The humans had no central command structure for the enemy to target, but instead operated as a network of independent units that supported each other through shared tactical understanding. Commander Zephyus realized that everything the galaxy understood about human military capabilities was fundamentally wrong. These soldiers were not chaotic and undisciplined. They were executing sophisticated tactics that appeared chaotic only to observers who expected conventional military responses. The humans were fighting a completely different kind of war as the third day of combat began. The Devourer fleet faced a situation they had never encountered before. Human resistance was not only continuing, but the machines were taking casualties at rates that threatened the success of their mission. The mechanical constructs had been programmed to exploit the rigid command structures and predictable tactics of conventional galactic military forces. Strategic analyst Morgeth watched human soldiers emerge from positions the Devourers thought they had destroyed. Hours earlier, the humans had prepared their defensive network to absorb enormous punishment while maintaining combat effectiveness through redundancy and individual initiative. This approach to warfare had no precedent in galactic military history. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell coordinated resupply operations that continued, despite constant enemy bombardment. Human logistics doctrine emphasized distributed supply systems that could function even when cut off from central support. Every position maintained enough supplies for extended independent operations, and soldiers shared resources automatically. When units were combined or separated, Master Sergeant Robert Clark led a counterattack against a Devourer position using tactics that would have been impossible with conventional military training. His soldiers moved independently through terrain while maintaining coordination through training and experience rather than constant communication. The attack succeeded because the machines had no programming to deal with such adaptive tactical behavior. Observer Velnath transmitted his final combat report as the 72nd hour of battle began. Human military doctrine appears to be based on assumptions completely different from established galactic military science. Their soldiers fight as if they expect to be outnumbered, outgunned, and abandoned, while still maintaining combat effectiveness through individual training and distributed leadership. The Devourer fleet commander reached a conclusion that contradicted everything in their programming database. Human resistance had exceeded all acceptable parameters, and continuing the engagement would result in unacceptable mechanical losses. For the first time in their operational history, the Devourers prepared to withdraw from a planetary assault without achieving their objectives. Commander Zephyus watched in stunned. Admiral Patricia Stone stood in the Tactical Operations Center aboard the heavy cruiser arriving at Kepler 442b as the Devourer fleet completed its withdrawal. The silence in the command center was profound as officers who had expected to conduct evacuation operations instead found themselves witnessing the first successful defense against the galactic mechanical threat in recorded history. Colonel Jake Morrison waited in the debris-strewn command bunker that had served as his headquarters for the final 36 hours of combat. Around him, exhausted soldiers continued monitoring communication networks and coordinating recovery operations with the same methodical professionalism they had demonstrated throughout the engagement. The HFY victory was total, but the human response was characteristically understated. Commander Zephyus transmitted his preliminary report to Meridian Prime with hands that shook despite his best efforts at maintaining professional composure. Human forces have successfully repelled Devourer assault fleet after 72 hours of continuous combat. Enemy withdrawal appears to be permanent, with mechanical losses exceeding acceptable operational parameters. Request immediate council session to discuss implications. Strategic analyst Morgoth reviewed his combat recordings, searching for explanations that made sense within established military doctrine. Everything he had observed challenged fundamental assumptions about warfare that had remained unchanged for millennia. The humans had fought a type of war that existed outside every theoretical framework known to galactic military science. Observer Velnath compiled casualty reports that defied mathematical projections. Human losses were significant but far below the total annihilation that every computer model had predicted. More importantly, the soldiers who survived were already conducting after-action reviews and planning improvements to their defensive systems, as if this engagement was merely one lesson in an ongoing educational process. Captain Ryan Davis walked through the destroyed remains of the decoy command center that had served its purpose perfectly. The Devourers had targeted this facility repeatedly while the real command functions operated from mobile platforms throughout the battlefield. The deception had worked exactly as human military doctrine predicted it would. Admiral Stone's transport landed at the primary human base 6 hours after the Devourer withdrawal. As she emerged from the shuttle, she saw soldiers who looked exactly like the undisciplined barbarians the galaxy had expected to find. The difference was that these barbarians had just accomplished something no civilized military force had ever achieved. The post-action review began immediately in a damaged structure that still functioned as a meeting hall. Colonel Morrison assembled his surviving unit commanders for the kind of detailed analysis that the galactic observers found most disturbing. The humans discussed their failures and mistakes with clinical precision while planning improvements for future engagements. Ambassador Zarathek arrived aboard the Galactic Council emergency response vessel 3 days after the AO battle ended. She came expecting to oversee evacuation operations and conduct damage assessment. Instead, she found human forces already rebuilding their defensive positions and preparing for the next engagement that they considered inevitable. Major Scott Adams briefed the galactic delegation on human defensive doctrine with the same calm professionalism he had demonstrated throughout the engagement. We established defensive positions designed to channel enemy movements into prepared engagement. Areas our soldiers operated independently when cut off from command, while maintaining tactical coordination through shared training and doctrine. Commander Zephyus interrupted the briefing with growing frustration. Your soldiers behaved completely contrary to established military discipline. They acted independently without orders, abandoned positions when prudent, and attacked enemy forces from concealed positions rather than maintaining honorable formations. How can you call this professional military conduct? Captain Lisa Carter responded with a slight smile that would have been invisible to anyone who had not spent years reading human expressions. Commander Zephyus, you have observed the difference between military discipline designed for parade grounds and military professionalism designed for winning wars. Our soldiers follow doctrine that prioritizes mission accomplishment over ceremonial requirements. Strategic analyst Morgeth studied the human after-action reports with growing comprehension. The soldiers discussed their performance with brutal honesty, identifying failures and planning improvements for scenarios they expected to encounter in future engagements. This continuous learning process was completely alien to galactic military tradition, which emphasized perfecting established doctrine. Colonel Morrison addressed the assembled galactic representatives with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to students. Every conflict in human history has been a learning laboratory where we tested tactics against intelligent enemies who adapted to our methods. We developed military doctrine based on the assumption that no plan survives contact with the enemy observer. Velnath finally understood the fundamental difference between human military science and galactic military tradition. The aliens had developed warfare as a ritualized activity with predetermined outcomes based on technological superiority. Humans had developed warfare as a problem-solving exercise where adaptation and improvisation were more important than technological advantages. Ambassador Zarathek requested a private meeting with Admiral Stone and Colonel Morrison. The conversation lasted 6 hours and covered military doctrine, logistics training, and the philosophical differences between galactic and human approaches to organized conflict. By the end, she understood that her species had fundamentally misunderstood what professional military service actually meant. Admiral Stone explained human military education with the patience of a teacher addressing confused students. Our soldiers train constantly not to perfect predetermined responses but to develop judgment and adaptability. Every engagement teaches lessons that improve performance in subsequent operations. We assume our enemies will learn from their failures, just as we learn from ours. Commander Zephius spent days studying human training records and combat doctrine with growing amazement. The apparent chaos he had observed was actually sophisticated tactical flexibility, based on individual competence and shared understanding of strategic objectives. Every human soldier was trained to understand not just their specific role, but the larger mission and how to contribute when circumstances changed. The galactic military establishment struggled to comprehend the implications of what had happened at Kepler 432b. Human forces had defeated an enemy that every mathematical model said was invincible. They had done so using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, yet their methods were clearly more effective than thousands of years of galactic military evolution. Strategic analyst Morgeth transmitted his final report to the Galactic Council with recommendations that would revolutionize military doctrine throughout known space. Human military professionalism is based on principles completely different from our traditional approaches. Their emphasis on adaptability and individual competence produces soldiers who become more effective under adverse conditions, rather than less effective. Captain Davis concluded the formal briefings by addressing the fundamental question that every galactic representative wanted answered. You observed our forces and concluded we were undisciplined because we do not fight the way you fight. You were correct that we approach warfare differently, but wrong about what that difference means. We are not undisciplined. We are differently disciplined. Observer. Velnath understood the distinction with sudden clarity. Galactic military discipline emphasized conformity to predetermined standards and procedures. Human military discipline emphasized competence in achieving objectives regardless of the methods required. The humans had developed professional soldiers while the galaxy had developed professional military performers. Ambassador Zarathek addressed the emergency session of the Galactic Council with recommendations that challenged everything their civilization believed about military organization. The humans possess military capabilities that exceed our most optimistic projections because they have developed warfare as a science rather than as a tradition. We request immediate integration of human military advisors into galactic defense planning. Admiral Kethnar of the Crystalline Hegemony asked the question that every council member was thinking. If human military doctrine is superior to our established methods, why did their historical conflicts appear so chaotic and inefficient when we observe them? Colonel Morrison answered with the insight that would reshape galactic understanding of human civilization. You observed our conflicts and saw chaos because you were looking for the wrong things. Every human war was a testing ground where we experimented with tactics, logistics, technology, and leadership under combat conditions. We were not fighting inefficiently, we were learning efficiently. War. Marshal Veltosh of the Thalorian Empire made the formal request that would change galactic history. The Thalorian Empire respectfully requests human military advisors to assist in reorganizing our defense forces according to principles demonstrated at Kepler 442b. We acknowledge that our understanding of professional military service was incomplete. Admiral Chen Wei responded for Earth with the Diplomati.